What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to HBCU Pulse Radio on SiriusXM channel 142 HBCU. So we were talking about the SWAC and everything going on in the SWAC, but we got to talk about the champs, man. We got to talk about the MEAC, man. We got to talk about North Carolina Central and what's really going on because they continue to keep beating the SWAC. I'm just saying it's the truth. So I got my guy Josh Sims Jr. He's a North Carolina Central alumnus. He played football at North Carolina Central, and he's the host of HBCU Nightly. Josh, how you doing, man?
Man, doing phenomenal, my brother. Blessed and highly favored, man. I'm super appreciative to be on the show with you, my brother. Man, all of the work that you guys are doing over at HBCU Pulse, man, and really being able to give the game something that has been missing, man, honestly. So super salute to you and your team there at HBCU Pulse, and super salute to 1801 Fayetteville Street, Durham, North Carolina, 27707, North Carolina Central University, man. We the champs, baby. We the champs.
Yes, sir. So first and foremost, I got to ask you this before we really get into it. How are you feeling, man? North Carolina Central, you guys in 2016, you played Grambling, and it was a really defensive game, lost 10-9, but then you came back and you put the HBCU culture on your back and you beat Jackson State in the game of the year, really. So how are you feeling as an alum, man?
Man, honestly, man, I've summed this feeling up into two particular moments, man. After the game ended, man, for those of you who don't know, man, I'm not only a North Carolina Central alum, but I'm also a third generation North Carolina Central alum. My mother and father went to North Carolina Central. My grandparents, my grandmother and grandfather went to North Carolina Central as well. And so, upon the end of the game, man, the first person who called me was my mom. And I said, Mama, we did it. It felt like, the ghost of 2016 was finally off of our back. And for a long time, man, we felt the stain, man, of losing that 2016 national championship game, and what I thought was one of our best teams as well, led by Malcolm Bell and that whole squad and that team, man, and under Coach Mack. But this team in particular was a renaissance back, man. So this one felt a little better because this squad felt like the old school North Carolina Central football teams that I grew up on. I came up through the 90s, man, so I remember seeing Coach Oliver play in the 90s. I remember seeing Adrian Jones playing in the 90s, man. I remember seeing Dawson Odoms play in the 90s, man. I remember seeing all of these guys, man, who are now coaches, who the world are getting to know as coaches. I remember seeing these guys play, man, as a kid, man. And I just remember how they really kind of represented. Shoot, I remember seeing Coach Moten play when he was at North Carolina Central playing basketball as a kid as well, man. So, to see us return back to this, man, the feeling is incredible. It's hard to explain. It's hard to express, brother. But we the champs, man, and it feels good to be the champs for sure.
So you hear that passion? That's alum passion, man. That is the passion of an HBCU alum that's making it happen, that sees their school succeeding, not only in football, but like you said, Coach, more than basketball, making it happen, making it to the tournament, just doing all these amazing things. So let's get to you at North Carolina Central. So I got to ask this. What made you choose North Carolina Central as your HBCU?
Man, it would be cliche to say that because my parents and my grandparents had gone there, that I felt like it was needed for me to kind of keep the tradition going. That would be cliche. But the truth is, man, I had my own personal experience with North Carolina Central, man. I had North Carolina Central was the only school I applied to. I played high school football, obviously was willing to take whatever opportunities I wanted. But when Coach Jake Cabell called my grandfather and told him that they had a space for me on that program, man, it felt like I arrived, man. It felt like I got there. When Miss Luann and our old AD, Miss Wicker McCree, showed up to Wilson, North Carolina, and gave me my admission papers in front of my face. It just meant something differently, man. It felt different, man. And then having the opportunity to keep my family's legacy going was a big piece too, brother. I'm gonna be honest. Not only did my grandparents go to North Carolina Central, my mother and father went there, but my father's only sibling, my Aunt Michelle, and her husband, my Uncle Patrick, both went to North Carolina Central. Half of, if not more than half of my grandfather's siblings went to North Carolina Central. Nieces and nephews, cousins, everybody went there, man. So it felt like a family affair. And I'd be darned if you walk in that house with anything on it but that maroon and gray. So it was a combination of my own experience with North Carolina Central, man, and having a chance to visit and have my own personal experience with 1801 Fayetteville Street and those sloping hills and verdant greens. But it was also, the legacy that my parents and my grandparents had laid down in North Carolina Central, that I felt like I can take up this mantle and I can continue this legacy at our illustrious university.
I love it. Like, what I hear from it is legacy. And I think that's the dream that every HBCU alum sort of wants, is to build that legacy within their family. Because I know that's one thing that I would want to do. So I got to ask you this, like, a part of your legacy is being a football player, for the Eagles football team. So talk to us about your experience, playing for Central, as a football player.
Yeah, man. I enjoyed my time, man. I put my time into the service, like you hear brothers and sisters who went into the military say, man, I did my time. I came to North Carolina Central as a preferred walk-on, man, and my true freshman year at North Carolina Central, I was clearinghouse ineligible, so I didn't get to play, practice, work out at all my true freshman year at Central. A lot of that had to do with, just really kind of the classes that I took in high school and things of that sort. And transition, I had transferred from Winston-Salem to Wilson, North Carolina, and went from North Forsyth High School to Bedingfield High School, where the curriculum was a little bit different. Took some different classes, and so that may have made me clearinghouse ineligible. But from the moment that I got cleared, when I got cleared and was able to practice and do my thing, man, I tried to do what I believe was going to help me to stay on the team, have a spot on the team, stay on the team, and eventually earn a scholarship. And what I saw from, whether it's from Coach Most Rising, God rest in peace, man, who passed this past off season, and my coordinators, my position coaches, Andre George, who was my first position coach in North Carolina Central. I actually came in and played DB first when I got there, man. Wore number 49 and played cornerback just to be able to just to get on the bus, man, just to be able to make it on the team. And Coach George saw something in me, and then we got the great honorable Dr. Henry Frazier III as our head coach in the spring of my redshirt sophomore year. And that's when everything changed for me, man. And I take the quote that Coach Frazier gave to us on his first day with me anywhere. I don't play favoritism. You my guy if you making plays. If you stop making plays, you no longer my guy. But as soon as you start making plays again, you my guy again. And that is a statement, I believe, from him that is about accountability and understanding. So the discipline and accountability and the just everything that I learned from playing in North Carolina Central, man. We didn't win a ton of games when I was at Central, but that was because we transitioned to Division I while I was there. But the reality is, man, I got my spot, my space, and my name is cemented in North Carolina Central football history, and I ain't lose the A&T that much neither, too. So, y'all better act like you.
Hey, man, the rivalry goes deep. We're gonna talk about A&T in a second, but I have to ask you this because I listen to HBCU Nightly. It's on Twitter Spaces weekly, and then you have the AMP show too. So that's super dope on Amazon AMP. So you were very prideful in this season. You were saying from Jump Street that North Carolina Central is going to be there in December. Like, we going to win the MEAC, and like we going to the to the Celebration Bowl. Like, you knew from jump, even when folks were doubting. And I know that as an alum, we naturally have that pride in our HBCUs. But like, you would break it down about the offensive line and about Davies, how he's improving. So you knew, like, on a different level as like an analyst, that North Carolina Central was going to be there. So like, where did that come from? Like, did you always really have that that knowledge that, hey, Central is going to be the one, we going to make it big. Like, we're going to be the ones that win in the end.
Yeah, I think, July, I stepped foot on North Carolina Central's campus and pulled up on Coach Oliver, man. As former players do a lot of times. For people who may not know, former players of different programs, man, during the summertime or during the off season, you pull up on your program, you pull up on your HBCU. And I pulled up on Coach Oliver in the off season in July, came upstairs, man. And I've told this story 100 times, man. When I got up there was a former player from the 70s that was sitting up there with Coach Oliver, and they were just sitting there chopping it up. I had my son with me, and we just sat down and chopped up game, man. As most people who probably are in fraternities know, when you introduce yourself to another person of the same fraternity, there's an introduction that you generally give to that person to let them know, hey, I'm of the same frat, I'm of the same group. So, I came up and did my introduction. I played under Coach Rise and played under Coach Frazier, and the gentleman from the 70s said, okay, well, where you from? I said, I'm from Wilson. I told him, he said, I think I remember you, man. I was like, and that solidifies the thing. But when I got there and listened to what Coach Oliver was saying about this team in July, about how 95% of the guys were there the whole summer. First of all, let's keep this real now. We were returning a quarterback who had been starting since his freshman year. Second quarterback in school history who's passed for over 2,000 yards in consecutive seasons. And then you tell me this veteran offensive line and this veteran receiving core who was young the year before, and now they done had a chance to grow up and get a little bit more of their man strength, was around. And then he talked about the defense and how all of those guys was tight-knit and they was hanging out. And the 5% of guys who hadn't been there all summer, in 3 days, they were supposed to all be there. So 100% of the team was there a month before camp even started. And I'm gonna be honest with you, brother. Randall, I'm gonna be honest, man. I was like, man, what? As talented as I already thought this team would be, obviously, we were coming off the South Carolina State victory the year before. They were returning a ton of players. They still had Shaq there, still had their defense there. They had lost to Kobe Durant, a couple other guys, but they still were solid. So I didn't really know. But when I pulled up on campus and coach told me that Davius had been there all summer, I had been to the spring game. I saw what it looked like in the spring. I was like, man, there's something special about what's going on here. And so, from that point forward, from that visit on, man, I went on every single publication I could go in. I started HBCU Nightly because I felt like I needed to tell the world this was coming. I mean, I felt like, if I don't tell the world that North Carolina Central is coming, they'll never know, and they'll act like they were surprised when it came to December. And lo and behold, man, they made right on my prognostication.
Yeah, and they definitely did. And I think the bounce back is really the craziest thing for me. So, Central, of course, you all went 6-5 the year before in 2021, and then, 10-2 in 2022. But the thing that people don't understand, especially with the MEAC, is that you all were 4-1 in conference. And what messes up people's perceptions is the out of conference games, which I've been back and forth on it. Because when I first started really delving into sports more as far as covering it, I was like, why are we playing out of conference games? But now I'm like, okay, money, draft eligible. You want to play against tougher programs. Now I understand it a bit more, but like oftentimes those records are deceiving, like how it was with South Carolina State. But like you all just this season, I want to just get into like the games of the season for Central. Like you all were successful in every metric, out of conference, in conference, whole 9 yards. So let's go on and get into it. Let's go on and talk about your rival. Let's go on and talk about North Carolina A&T, the game where North Carolina Central won in the Aggie Eagle Classic 28-13, and that was the first time that Central won since 2017. So let's talk about that. Like, how are you feeling leading into that game? What did you see, and your thoughts after the game?
Well, I knew going into that game that they didn't know what to expect. And one thing that I left out in there, and I intentionally left it out because I knew we were going to go here next. I intentionally left out that it was at that time in July that I visited Coach Oliver that I walked up in the coach's office, and guess whose face I see? I see Courtney Cord, our new defensive coordinator, who had previously been at the school down the highway, who had, won championships at the school down the highway. And upon seeing him, I'm going to be honest, Randall, that's what really made me say, oh, ain't no way in the world them jokers going to beat us down the highway. They can't. There ain't nothing they can do. Because they, honestly, as a North Carolina Central fan, and we joke about this now, but it's real talk. Central now has become Coach U. If you want to get an opportunity to be offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, head coach, shout out to TC Taylor, who's now the head football coach at Jackson State, previously the offensive coordinator at North Carolina Central. So going into that game, man, I had already known that Courtney Cord was in the building. And Courtney Cord was our new defensive coordinator. And I knew the intensity that Big Bro brought, man. Courtney Cord is a former football player in North Carolina Central. He's an alum in North Carolina Central. I know the intensity that he brought, that he brings to coaching. And the truth is that they have been capitalizing on that for years on us, the fact that a lot of the guys who are Central grads were coaches at A&T. So, but I knew that they didn't have an answer for Davius Richard. That it's hard to duplicate 6'3", 215, 220. That's God-given. That's something that, we ain't got nothing to do with that. And then I saw how much this kid improved as a passer year over year. And so I said, well, going into that game, if he can just be 70% of the passer that we need him to be, if he can move the sticks on third and short, if he can keep us ahead of the chains on first and second down, that there was no way that they were going to be able to match our intensity and match where we coming from. And they ain't going to be able to do it this year neither. So I'm just putting that out there.
Man, I love it because, like, really for me in that game, that's when I was like, Central gonna be a problem. Like when I saw Davius Richard and like he was just running on that defense so well. He was passing on the defense so well, and it's like it was like almost like A&T couldn't get a groove going. Like that was when I was like, okay, I think that we're seeing something different, and that's when I was like, I really want to see Central versus Jackson State in the Celebration Bowl. Like that was the moment. That was the moment. Because I think I said it on our sports show with Ariel because she was like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna win." And then she, like you all won, and then she was seeing the same thing when it was like, "Yo, Davius Richard is that guy." We sort of both had our eye on that, and it's like he's gonna be the one. So let's talk about after that. So you all are rolling, winning, and honestly, people weren't talking about it because Deion Sanders and Jackson State took up so much oxygen because Benedict was undefeated, and then you all were rolling. But the game against New Hampshire, our conference opponent, and then let's really talk about it because New Hampshire, not only did they make the FCS playoffs, they made it to the second round and lost to number 7 Holy Cross, and you all beat them and beat them pretty decisively. And people couldn't really watch it because it was on Flow Sports, and a lot of folks didn't know that because it wasn't on ESPN Plus. And I didn't get a chance to fully watch that game. I watched some of it because I didn't know it was on Flow Sports. I thought it was just like, oh, I guess it's just they beat New Hampshire and they burned the tape. But it's like no, it's so like I thought that's what I thought. I was like, oh, that didn't happen. Strike for the record, 100-point game. We don't got the tape. Strike for the record. That's what I thought it was. But it's on Flow Sports. I got you gotta go watch it. So tell me about like that game, man. Like just enjoy it because that's when I'm like, okay, it's something different about Central this year.
Yeah, man, boy, you wild, brother. But listen, man. Look, man. I mean, all honesty, man, I had to get they were running like a free month trial with Flow Sports that you had to do the month before the season started, and then you had to pay. So, I knew we were playing them, and I knew we were going to have to play them on Flow Sports because that's where the Colonial does their games, and that's where their media rights deal is. But nonetheless, in that game, man, I watched that game. I was supposed to go to that game. I was supposed to fly up to New Hampshire for that game, but it was my grandfather's birthday weekend, and I needed to be here. But nonetheless, though, that game for us signaled something to the entire country. First of all, when you think about the conversations, if I can just take everybody back to the conversations that were happening at that time, that was when the strength of, conference strength rankings or how strong a conference is, the rankings had come out at that point, and the MEAC was dead last. It was ranked the worst conference in all of FCS. I'm talking about below the Pioneer, below the Patriot League, below some of these pushover, the Big South, some of these pushover leagues. We were the OVC, we were rated the worst conference in all of FCS. And then North Carolina Central leaves Durham, North Carolina, and then goes to Durham, New Hampshire. And I'm talking about from the first snap of the game, they dominate this program. They dominate that team. I'm talking about there was no chance from the first kickoff. I'm literally the first kickoff of the game. North Carolina Central goes off. New Hampshire gets the ball first. North Carolina goes down the field on the kickoff, and boom, from the first kickoff. And so I was not so much surprised as much as I was like, take that. How dare y'all say that this conference is the worst conference in all of FCS football? And we did this as a way to be able to show and prove, listen, I'm the most critical person in the world over the conference. But this accumulation of institutions ain't to be played with. And I felt like North Carolina Central went up to New Hampshire and took care of business. Morgan State did the same thing. They went up to Stony Brook, took care of business. But in this game in particular, man, from the start of the game, the defense came and got a stop, and it just looked like this team was very, very special. Now, one of the things that people don't really recognize in that game, especially if you didn't, necessarily watch that game because it was on Flow Sports, which is darn near like incredibly difficult to try to watch a game on Flow Sports. It's not I don't believe it's a very great product. That's just my opinion. But nonetheless, if you go back and you watch that game, we had a couple guys that were missing because they were hurt. And they had gotten hurt in the North Carolina A&T game. And we thought that we would have had them back in time for that game. And nonetheless, no excuses. We went up there and took care of business. But you will see what happens because of those injuries, you see what ends up happening 2 out of the next 4 weeks, what ends up occurring for us and looking like we have slip-ups during the schedule. And I know you got to talk about it. We got to talk about it. We got to talk about the elephant in the room in those games. But I just want to make sure people understand, man, we had some injuries that came from the A&T game, that came from that New Hampshire game. And those injuries ended up coming back to bite us for 2 out of the next 4 weeks.
And I feel that, but just before we get, because we got to, of course, talk about Campbell and we got to talk about that South Carolina State game. But in this game in particular, and also that Tennessee Tech game we're going to talk about in a second too, what I saw was North Carolina Central really succeeding out of conference when other HBCUs simply have not. Like, I know my HBCU, Fort Valley, like in my time of being at Fort Valley, I've been Fort Valley affiliated and graduated 2019, and I've been affiliated since 2015. Like when we played Valdosta, it was a loss. You know what I'm saying? Like when we play West Georgia, it's a loss. When we played a lot of these other, schools out of conference, even the HBCUs like FAMU, that's a loss for us. And it's a significant loss, but we were good in conference. And I see now how like not succeeding in those games or even looking competitive in those games, how that can make a team look and how that can make the conference look. But in this game, number 25 ranked New Hampshire, they didn't crater after this game. They kept winning. They lost a couple more games that were 9-4, but they kept winning. And then they made it to the second round of the FCS playoffs. So just seeing what Central did to New Hampshire and Tennessee Tech, like, is there like a blueprint of how HBCUs can win these out of conference games?
Absolutely. That is the blueprint. I mean, I think when you talk about how can HBCUs win in out of conference games, I think you have to look at how HBCUs need to schedule games in general now going forward. North Carolina Central has been very intentional, and I have to give a super kudos to our old AD, but also to our new AD. Our previous AD, Miss Ingrid Wicker-McCree, was very, very intentional about us not playing these games and getting into these games. Before Prime even said it, it's getting into these games and you just going to get a check, but you're going to get your head beat on. Because of what it does ultimately to the psyche of the football player, but two, what it ultimately does to the overall psyche of the team itself. When you have an offensive line as good as this, but then you go play against you might go play against a juggernaut. Had we gone and play against Ohio State this year or Georgia this year, prior to playing this out of conference schedule, man, ain't no telling what ends up happening to this team because you might have some significant injuries playing against those teams when you're not prepared to play against those teams. Not that we can't beat those teams, which we absolutely can. It's just about being prepared. And I think that the blueprint that North Carolina Central kind of laid down, and I think that the MEAC in whole is kind of laying down is, go play a tough FCS opponent. Play a tough FCS. You don't have to play the toughest FCS out of conference schedule. You don't have to go North Dakota State, South Dakota State, James Madison. You ain't got to go that crazy. James Madison FBS now, by the way. But you don't have to go that crazy. But you can play teams like New Hampshire. You can play teams like Monmouth. You can play teams like Kennesaw State when they were still FCS. You can play teams like Tennessee Tech. You can play teams like A&T who are an HBCU, but they're non-conference HBCU. You can play teams like that. And those teams, if you can beat those teams, then you absolutely can put yourself in a position to win your conference and be dominant. And I'm honestly, this North Carolina Central team this past season, I'm not sure very many FCS teams across the landscape could have been able to play with us because it started in the trenches for us. It was offensive line for us. And we were offensive line centered and heavy, and that's what allowed for Davius Richard to play well, and that's what allowed for him to play well in that game.
Right, and then I want to spotlight, you all had two offensive linemen that were MEAC all-conference offensive first team, and Robert Mitchell and Corey Bullock. And that was, I think, the thing that a lot of people don't understand, because when you get into the weeds of football, like a lot of folks that are casual fans, even casual HBCU fans, like they look at the quarterback or the wide receiver, or they might look at the defense in who hit the quarterback, who got the interception. But what I've heard consistently is that the games are won in the trenches. I think that's why Benedict in D2, that's why Benedict was so successful, because they had some guys in the trenches that were able to protect Eric Phoenix. And then you see the same thing with Davius Richard, and you saw that was that level of success. But we have to go to this Campbell game it was painful for several reasons, Josh. I can tell you why it was painful. Number one, the stream was really bad. Okay. The stream was really bad. Like, cause that was the same week. That was the same week that Howard, I think, played either Yale or Harvard. and that stream was really bad. Like it was painful to watch. Actually watching it, like even though Central, if you all had blew them out, I would have been like, I probably would turn the channel anyway. I'm like, I'm okay, good, they're winning, because it was just so bad to watch. But just the game itself, I was very hyped because like Campbell had like 4 or 5 HBCUs on schedule and you all were the first one. So it was Central, it was Jackson State, it was A&T, then it was Delaware State in the year. So I'm like, okay, like North Carolina Central is already on a roll. You beat number 25 New Hampshire. So I'm already knowing that the Eagles going to let the Camels know what's up. Then 48-18. And I was like, what in the world? So what happened in that game? And I want to preface it with this too. Like, how did you feel about people saying that this game would be indicative of what Central will look like against Jackson State?
Well, honestly, man, you have to, we in this game and we're on the media side of this and we have to be honest about the fact that the casual fan does not watch the amount of film that we do. They don't have the amount of conversations that we do with coaches and staff and players and really take as much attention to it as we do. And I knew this game, and I told anybody who would listen, I believed that we would win this game, but I also thought that it would be a tough game for us to win for a couple of reasons. One, I just said it a minute ago that we had some significant injuries at that time that we didn't have 4 weeks prior when we played against A&T. The second reason was that Campbell was just coming off of a bye week. I mean, the previous week was their bye week. And we were playing the week before our bye week. And so that point at which you kind of like, well, we get a chance to get some guys back, get some rest. They catching us at a time where though we're winning, we limping. And then I've coached this game. I've been around this game a long time. I've always told people that the great equalizer in this game, when you know that the team is limping and they may be more talented, which I absolutely believe, and everybody now knows that North Carolina Central is more talented than Campbell. But if you got to have something to equal out, make an equalizer, tempo is going to be the thing that you do. So when you look at that 48-18 victory by Campbell, I got to take my hats off, first of all, for them being extremely prepared. Overly prepared almost. I mean, it looked like they came in with a great game plan and they said, well, if they hurting, it's our job to turn up the tempo and go as fast as we possibly can to not give them a chance to be able to get their composure. And by the time we got our composure, you're down 3 touchdowns. And Coach Oliver talked about this during the lead up to the Celebration Bowl, that we did some things that were uncharacteristic of us in that game, just trying to get back. We went away from the running game. When we really could have just gotten back to the running game and put ourselves in a position to control the clock, control the time of possession, and then get to a place, in the fourth quarter where it may be a 1-possession game in the fourth quarter, get the ball and see what you can do. So that was very uncharacteristic. I know why everybody, use that game as to be an identifier and make it as indicative of who we are. But the truth was that, leading up to the Celebration Bowl, I told everybody and their mama, watch that game 1 million times. Watch it 100,000 times. See if you can watch it 100,000 times from Thursday night to Friday night. Then watch it 100,000 times more Friday night to Saturday night. And so by the time you get to 12 o'clock Saturday night during the Celebration Bowl, you're going to see a completely different team. And I always knew it was going to be that. So, I feel you on there. It broke my heart, but I also knew all of the small little nuances that led up to that.
And, just for me, I try my best to be as nuanced as possible about sports in general, because I think that, and you see this a lot in basketball, it's like it's 82 game schedule, and it's like every win and loss. Oh, is the team bad? And all of a sudden the team wins. Oh, they're going to the championship. You see it with the Lakers, where it's like the Lakers, oh, they suck, trade everybody. All of a sudden, 4-game win streak. Is LeBron back? Like it's like it's sports, man. Like it's like it ebbs and it flows, and then it ebbs and flows more, even in football, because it's such a shortened schedule. So I think that people's takes that you were defending against HBCU Nightly, whereas like what happened with Campbell, man, it's like, it's more nuanced than that. And I think that even your hardcore sports fans like jettison past that to say something crazy, because it's like, okay, that was an out of conference game. There were injuries that happened, and it's nice time to move forward. But we saw the most people, and I was on HBCU Nightly Spaces, all right? We saw the most people go crazy when y'all lost to South Carolina State. It went at the point was the game of the year. And like you were flabbergasted, you were disgusted, and it was a lot you had to answer for on the HBCU Nightly show. So let's talk about that game. Give us your perspective on that game and what happened. Because I honestly thought that, because I want to see Central and Jackson State. I was like, yeah, South Carolina State gonna make it back. But what is your perspective on it?
Yeah, at that time, dog, I had to just eat crow. You know what I mean? I just had to just humble myself and say, really honestly, man, if it's at this point, if it's meant for us to get to the Celebration Bowl, I still think we're gonna win it. But ultimately, man, South Carolina State was in the driver's seat at that point. And shout out to my brother Stephen Gaither from HBCU Game Day, man. He made me eat crow for 2-3 weeks after that. But it didn't matter how bad we beat Morgan. It didn't matter how we beat Howard or everybody else in conference. He made me eat crow about that, man. And honestly, truthfully, as an alum, as a person in the media, as a person who follows this game, I didn't have any reason why we lost that game. I could not give a single excuse as to why we lost that game, Brother Randall. And we just had to own up to that. And if you ask Coach Oliver the same thing, he'll say the same thing. There was absolutely no reason why we lost that game. We should not have lost that game. But I will say this. That was South Carolina State's best played game all season. And that is the South Carolina State team. When I saw that day, that's the South Carolina State team I expected to see the rest of the season. I'm going to be honest with you. So to see that happen down the stretch with South Carolina State, for Corey Fields to become so inconsistent, a little bit of me was like, well, man, if you was going to be inconsistent the rest of the season, why you want to just inconsistent with us? You just play your best game against us. But, ultimately, man, 20 points off the board, 2 touchdowns taken back because of penalties inside of the 10, two holding calls inside of the 10-yard line, man. Both of them were touchdowns. Both of them called back for holding, questionable situation. And then we missed 2 field goals in that game. So that's 20 points right there, man, taken off the board. That would have made this a blowout like we did for everybody else in the conference versus we end up putting ourselves in a situation where we get down the field, try to go score to win the game. We throw an interception inside the 10. And that's the ball game. That's the ball game, man. And, it broke my heart, man. And, I got a lot of love for the athletic director of South Carolina State. She was on there when I went on a tirade and had a soliloquy about South Carolina State. South Carolina State, I love y'all, but I hate y'all too, boy.
I remember when you were doing that where it's like, man, I hate everything right now. That was so hilarious when you did that. That was when like HBCU Nightly was in like, is it bad? It was like First Take 2012 energy at that point. Like, it was so great because it's like this is what we need here, man. We need this energy. It made me like, okay, when's the next game, man? It was amazing. But for me, it's like, I thought that last drive, I thought that Davies was going to have his moment where it's like he was going to show the nation, like, I'm him. Like, this is it. But it's like, it didn't go right. And like I said, like those things happen. But, it's crazy that I think some people, that are interested in HBCU football, and like I said, they don't watch it like how we watch it, just sort of erase that New Hampshire game. They erased the A&T game. They erased those other stretches of dominance that you all had at the beginning of the season. But, it was easy to sort of think that, man, South Carolina State is going right back. Like, that was sort of the easy thing to think that. But like I said, South Carolina State, they falter and they ended up 3-8. Meanwhile, you all continued to roll and continued to make it happen with blowout wins. It was a close win against Delaware State, but y'all made it happen. But we have to talk about this leading into the Celebration Bowl because we knew you all were making it to the Celebration Bowl. Although Howard and North Carolina Central co-champions, that happened. But I know that happened. I know that did happen. But Tennessee Tech win 22-20. That was another out-of-conference game, and that was right before the Celebration Bowl. So talk to us real quick about that game because that was actually a really good clutch game.
It was, man. It was an incredible game. I had to go on the road and play at Tennessee Tech. Tennessee Tech had actually come to us the previous year. And that was a very good game the previous year. And Tennessee Tech had gotten the W at us. And so we felt like we need to return the favor. But it came down literally to the last possession again. And you talked about during the South Carolina State game, Davius Richard being able to have a moment, had that moment where it's like, I think the South Carolina State game was a bigger environment. So it really did provide for a bigger moment. The Tennessee Tech game was a big game, but our fates had already been sealed. We already knew we were going to the Celebration Bowl, but we didn't want to go into the Celebration Bowl with an L. So the Tennessee Tech game was just as big, just as important to us as all the other games that we had on the schedule. I remember leading up to that game, so many people asking questions like, is Davius Richard even going to play in this game? And I'm like, y'all don't know this kid. If you don't know him by now, you ain't going to know this kid. He's playing in this game. But, man, just to talk about that last possession in that game, defense goes out, gets a stop with about 4 minutes or something left on the clock. And then the offense gets the ball back. We're planted inside of the 15-yard line to get the ball to go on a game-winning drive. Run the ball, great balanced drive. And there's a play there in the fourth, on the fourth down where, Davius just stretches out. I mean, like Michael Jordan, from Space Jam moment where he stretched the arm out. Like it felt like his arm just extended out just a little bit. Fingertip of the football goes past the first down line, and we keep the thing going. End up winning the game by Adrian Olivo kick to win the game in that. And I believe that win is what pushed our confidence to a place where we knew there was nothing. It didn't matter who we were going to play in that Celebration Bowl. There was nothing they were going to be able to do with us. After you have a win like that to close out the season, to finish the season 9 wins, 9-2, after it still felt like an up and down season, man. You mentioned it, the Delaware State game. We played there for their homecoming. It's a tougher game than we wanted to be. We have to win that game on the final possession. They got the ball last, and our defense got to make a stop. So, we had moments like that during the season that helped me to believe that, these guys are fortuitous, man. These guys got something in them, man, that'll help them to be able to, win this game, whatever game's going to be. And then in the same fashion, man, Lord have mercy, I already know where you're going.
Hey, I'm going a lot of places with this because I don't think people that are listening really know what's up. You know what I mean? So I'm going to reintroduce it because you're going to bring in a lot of people that's watching and listening. So I need to let them know where I stand on the whole entire Celebration Bowl thing. Okay. Yeah. I said during the Celebration Bowl that Deion Sanders cannot coach. And first when I tweeted, I was like, was I too hasty on that? But then I saw the video that was released by the pregame show where you had, the coaches, and it wasn't necessarily Deion Sanders, but it was, his coaches that were like, hey, this is the game plan for this game. And the game plan throughout is we're better. And I'm not a football coach. I didn't play football. I'm more of a basketball guy. But I just know in every level, your game plan cannot be, I'm better than you. When by every metric, this is the exact same team. Points per game, even the number of like offensive linemen on the all conference team. Like this team, like you're playing and you're looking in the mirror playing yourself, even down to Davis. The thing that Davis does better than Shedeur is that Davis can run. Shedeur was a little bit better as far as completions, but they're essentially almost the same caliber quarterback. So it was the same team. So that was what really was crazy to me. And I knew it was going to be a great game, but I got to ask you. So let's talk about the Celebration Bowl. So from your vantage point, because you were setting them straight, you were like, just watch, this is what happened. So tell us your thought process about the Celebration Bowl. And honestly, we can also talk about disrespect. Talk about disrespect too, because there was a lot of folks that disrespecting Central.
Well, that's where I'm gonna go first. And I'm glad that I'm able to do it on this show. I'm gonna do it on this show the same way I did it on HBCU Nightly. I mean, the truth is that the level of disrespect, and I want to make sure I preface this statement. I expected it from Jackson State alum and fans. You're supposed to feel like your program and your alma mater and your institution they just like that. You're supposed to feel like that. But some of y'all casuals, some of y'all who don't, you don't really understand this game. You love one particular guy above anything else. You ain't really here for the coach. You have no idea what this looks like from an overall game perspective, from a preparation standpoint. You have no idea. You just infatuated with the brand that is the previous coach at Jackson State. Y'all got a little disrespectful. Not a little, you got real disrespectful. And I want to make sure that you guys understand this because I hope that this is a lesson for you going throughout life. Celebrity don't win you no games. The coach can't play. And at the end of the day, it comes down to those guys who got to line up against each other. And when you look at the preparation of one said team versus another said team, don't come to me talking about no lag or no layoff time, because when we were on Christmas break, our players were still practicing. So when it came down to the game itself, I tried to tell you that not only was the players better, not only were we a better team, our coaching staff from top to bottom was better. Our head coach was better. I felt like we had the better quarterback. And I got a lot of love for Shedeur. Everybody know, if you ever listen to HBCU Nightly, I give so much love to Shedeur about this kid's in between his ears. I don't know if I've seen another kid in between the ears as smart as he is at the age he is playing that position. But when you look at this game, I tried to tell y'all that North Carolina Central was just better. Not that we had the rest, not that we had all of these other advantages and all this other stuff. We were just a better team. And we had always been the better team. But because some of y'all got a little, you got a little beside yourself. You had a little bit too much dip on your chip, and we always do. And at some point, we all gonna have that time in our life. We just take a little bit too much. But the truth of the matter is, this team that we had this past season, I want y'all to make no mistake about it. They were better. And I'm gonna be honest with you, because I know we got to talk about it. That score y'all saw in that game, it could have been worse. I'm going to just tell you that. I'm going to leave that there. I ain't going to go there. It could have been worse. You go back and watch the film. Go watch the game if you want to. I'll send you the link for me directly. Go back and watch this game. It could have been worse, ladies and gentlemen.
It really could have. And it's just because like I said, I try to look at it from a nuanced perspective. It was a lot of hype around Jackson State, of course, because, Deion Sanders was there. I try my best not to talk about it as much anymore. But it was a lot of hype, but they were a really good team. But I think the difference that you see within the MEAC and the SWAC is, of course, the out-of-conference schedule where you're used to different styles, but also it was the trench play. And what I saw a North Carolina Central team that protected the quarterback so well. Yeah. And it's like Davius did not get sacked. He didn't get touched. He didn't get touched at all. And on the other side, Shedeur, I think Shedeur got it was two sacks. North Carolina, so you all were protecting the quarterback better. And then Davius being such a dual threat and being able to get those first downs. Then the play of the game for me that I think people missed, because I was watching the whole entire game. It was when Davius threw on Travis Hunter. And it was almost about a touchdown. Travis got to him. It was that first one. He hit that slant towards out of bounds. He threw it single coverage. That was Travis Hunter. He caught it off. So it's like I just saw so much in that game that I think that people glossed over because of the spectacle of what was Deion Sanders. And I think that's what we have to really look at in the future. I don't think Ed Reed is going to be Deion Sanders. I don't think he's going to be that. But I think that we're going to fall into the same traps. And I think the trap is the new shiny object, the celebrity that, even though people disagree with me, we do worship celebrities. He would disagree with my editorial. We do. Yeah. But it's like, why don't we look at someone like Coach Oliver that went to Central and that really built up this squad? Why don't we look at what's happening on the field? And we can enjoy the spectacle of this celebrity here, but why don't we look at the fact that, like I said, from every metric, this was an identical team. This isn't this is a scrap. This is an identical team. This isn't like Georgia and TCU. Okay, it wasn't like that because we're different. Georgia and TCU were different. The record was one thing, but it was two different things. Okay, no, it wasn't like that with Central and then Jackson State. Styles make fights, and it was like Ali fighting Ali. All right, you know what I'm saying? It's like, come on. So that was how I looked at it. But talking about the game, how did you look at the game? Because you already knew what was going to happen. How did you look at the game and what you saw on the field?
Well, I broke the game down into three parts. I knew that there was going to be a battle between North Carolina Central's offensive line and Jackson State's defensive line. I thought that Jackson State's defensive line going into this game was probably the weakest part of their defense. I thought that their back seven was probably the most competitive part between those linebackers and those DBs. I thought that was the best part of their defense. I mean, you talk about Travis Hunter, you talk about DeJuan, Nugget Warren. You talk about even Isaiah Bolden inside the slot. They played him a lot at the nickel. That's a 6'2 DB, 6'2, 6'3 DB playing at the nickel. If you ain't got somebody who can beat them out in space, you ain't gonna be able to get past them. Those safeties they had back there, I felt like they had a good rotation of safety. Cameron Sylvan Craig was a great kid. I thought he was incredible. I thought that he should have been first team all conference this year. And then Shiloh back there as well. I thought that back seven, and then you talk about Aubrey Miller. You know what I mean? I thought that their back seven was their strength of their defense. I thought that their defensive line was the weakest part of their defense. And I knew that if I looked at it from that part where our offensive line was the best part of our offense. is that our offensive line was the most stable and structured part of North Carolina Central's offense. And I knew that was going to be a battle. The second battle I looked at was the DBs and the wide receivers on both sides, whether it was Jackson State's wide receivers and Central's DBs or North Carolina Central's wide receivers and Jackson State DBs. Who was going to win that battle? All right. And we can run a poll on who we say won each battle. I think both receiving corps won the battle. I think Jackson State's wide receiving corps beat North Carolina Central's wide receiving corps. I think North Carolina Central's wide receiving corps beat Jackson State's wide receiving corps. Honestly, North Carolina Central's receiving corps made Travis Hunter look ordinary. And this is a kid that is absolutely not ordinary. He's extraordinary as a talent. But I also believe that Travis Hunter and all of the guys they had in their receiving corps made North Carolina Central's DBs look ordinary. And, both corps had guys that, North Carolina Central had Khalil Baker, who is now his draft stock is rising through the roof and things of that sort. Though they didn't pass or don't pass it against Khalil Baker a lot, and that's another conversation. But, at the end of the day, it was still, it was like that. It was a game. It was a football game. And I think the third part was going to be the battle between the coaches' minds, whether it's offensive coordinator Brett Bartolone versus, our defensive coordinator Courtney Core, or if it was going to be our offensive coordinator Matt Leone versus their defensive coordinator Coach D. And I thought that was going to be a just as important of a battle as how you going to call this play, how you going to adjust to this, how you going to adjust to that, how you going to make something happen versus all of these things. In all of these situations, who's going to win the battle here and there. And so I think that it was important to note those three parts. And all three of those parts ended up being the big part of how this game ended up turning out.
And I think another big part as well was for me, and this is what I highlighted when we did the lead-in show, the preview show, is the battle between Shedeur and Davius. And I predicted that Davius was going to prove that he was on that level. And I think that Shedeur had an amazing game when you look at even just what he threw for. It was amazing. He was really he's insanely accurate. He got a lot of yards, but it was a different defense that he saw. And a lot of the SWAC teams were putting pressure on him. They were really testing out that offensive line for Jackson State, and they were putting pressure on him. I think outside of North Carolina Central, I think Alcorn did a good job. I think Alabama State really did a great job. It was a little bit more going in that one. It was a little bit more with that one. You know what I mean? But I think Alabama State did a really great job with that. But when you look at Davius versus Shedeur, even with, Davius, when you look at the box score with the Tennessee Tech game, he didn't have the typical Davius Richard game, the game previous. He had that one interception, no touchdowns. So I knew that Davius was going to show something that Shedeur couldn't show, and that was that he couldn't do it with his legs, because Shedeur can too, but Shedeur isn't as quick and hard to take down as Davius, because it's hard, 6'3", like you say, it's hard to take him down. And I think that was the what separated it. And I think that people also go down to that moment with the tight end, that dropped the ball. But I think that it was also the fact that Davius stepped up in that first overtime, and it didn't because Jackson had 2 shots. Yeah. And it didn't happen. You got 2 shots. Yeah, saying the tight end dropped the ball, but you had another shot, and then you threw it too quick. You threw a bullet pass, threw it right through his hands, and that was all she wrote. So I think that that game, and I think the 2021 Celebration Bowl is an example that I think that game plan, it wins over shock value and the chatter and the talk. And we see that often in sports media. People be talking, but the results on the field is different. And that's why, and this is a whole other conversation, that's why a lot of us look at media industry folks crazy, because we'll say one thing, something else happens, and it's like, why do you even do this? You know what I'm saying? You're just talking. Yeah. That's why I'm like, I want to be more nuanced than that. Let me be a little bit more nuanced. But let's talk about next year. Let's talk about what the season looks like next year. So I looked on FBS schedule, and I see that we have a few games already planned out. You got North Carolina A&T on the 9th. That's Aggie Eagle Classic, Duke Mayo Classic. By the way, I just want to say this. I think that is disgusting that they in that bowl game, they dumping mayo on people. That is disgusting. Okay. I don't know. If that was a bowl game, I might have lost that bowl game just so I would have got no mayonnaise dunked on me. I would have been like, hey, just going to keep the field goal over there. You know what I'm saying? We're going to play good to the end. Just go wild left. You know what I'm saying? And they're like, good game, coach. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, that's not happening. But shout out to Duke Mayo Classic. Just shout out to y'all. You know what I'm saying? So UCLA, which, Alabama State played UCLA last year. So that, they're going to be tough. They're in the Pac-12 right now. They're going to be leaving really soon. Then you have Mississippi Valley State. They have, Coach Wade down there. Coach Wade was actually at Fort Valley. He was a wide receiving great at Valley. And, he's really good at developing. So I'm excited to see his team. Then a rematch with Campbell. That's going to be interesting on the 30th. Then the 7th of October versus Elon. So I'm really looking at the UCLA game like, okay, it's UCLA and Central's really good. Are we looking at an upset? Like, what you thinking?
Absolutely. I mean, anybody who knows, you look at that game last year between Florida A&M and UNC Chapel Hill. And everybody, because of that squad that FAMU had going into that game, and then obviously then you have all the situation that happens before the game, nobody gave FAMU a real chance. And FAMU really was in that game, and they was holding their own. Now, imagine that game with a team that's proven, that's bringing just about everybody back, that has confidence and consistency in their offensive coordinator, their defensive coordinator, their head coach, everybody. And then you insert Davius Richard. If I'm UCLA, I'm reaching out to Colorado. Let me ask, hey man, you got any film left over from the celebration? I'm just messing. But I'm listen, man. That I believe that's an upset opportunity. We saw Howard knock off UNLV a little while back. I think that everybody better get your popcorn. Be ready. I'm going back to Cali. I'm gonna be in LA for that game. And I'm looking forward to seeing what we end up doing against UCLA. And I'm telling y'all now, do not be surprised if we knock off the Bruins of UCLA. Telling you now.
They're not a world beater. I don't really think they're like the best. I mean, they were 9-4. They did pretty well. They lost to Oregon. They lost to Arizona. They lost to USC. With Heisman Trophy winner Caleb Williams. Which I'm a big fan of Caleb Williams, but CJ Stroud should have won that. That's a whole different conversation. And he showed that against Georgia. And they lost to Pittsburgh, in the bowl game, 37-35, one of the better bowl games. And that was the crowd that one I think was crazy. That was a crazy game. I was watching that game. But I think it's possible. I don't think they're world beaters. They had a really great season last year, but I don't think they're world beaters. And I think that, this North Carolina Central team, even if it's not a win, I think it puts people on notice and it scares them. I think that's very possible. And I think it's all going to come down to what's happening in the trenches. And you said that, it's some folks coming in. So I want to get you on record saying this. Like you said, there's some folks coming in on offensive line that are like that. Like, is that true?
Ladies and gentlemen, listen, if you thought our offensive line was scary this past season, you better get your high seat, your booster seat, whatever seat you need that's going to help you be able to put that seatbelt on even more. Because this offensive line we're going to have this coming season is better than the offensive line we had this past season. And we saw what this past season offensive line looked like. Look, you better get your popcorn ready. I promise you. And honestly, man, we see it all the time in teams like North Dakota State and South Dakota, them MVC schools. They go and they play against these Pac-12 schools, and they play really well against them. Sometimes they knock them off. North Carolina Central is built like those teams in those conferences. Nice, big, athletic offensive line that can get their hands on you and they're going to drive you. A great quarterback that's a dual threat that's balanced. An excellent running game. Mookie Colliers is back next year too, ladies and gentlemen. I know y'all saw the stiff arm around the world in the Celebration Bowl. He back next year, along with Taylor, along with a couple other young guys is going to get in that mix. And the whole receiving core is back. So you look at that and you look at a UCLA defense that's pedestrian at best. I don't see a reason why anybody believes that we don't have a chance to be able to go out to LA and take care of business.
I just want to say, as far as pedestrian, UCLA this year they held opponents to 29 points per game. I said held to 29 points per game. They averaged the opponents averaged 130 yards rushing per game and 273 passing yards per game. So yeah, and they were scoring 39. They can score. But yeah, the defense is pedestrian at best. And then they scored 29 touchdowns versus their opponent scoring 25. Passing,
they better have their mind right. I'll tell you that. Yeah. Not giving them no 29 points a game. You better have your mind right. I'll tell you that now.
Hey, you heard it here first. Upset alert! You heard it here first. You know what I'm saying? We go come back and talk about that game when it's that time. We're gonna be like, you heard it here. You know what I'm saying? Exclusives. You feel me? So, like, listen, this was amazing, man. We definitely got to have you back on because I definitely want to continue the coverage of North Carolina Central, really expand our coverage of that. I got love for North Carolina Central. I'm saying this for our YouTube audience, especially, is like I've seen North Carolina Central alum where it's like these HBCU brands don't love us. I love North Carolina Central. Like that was our best takeover when we did story takeovers. Shout to Jalen Baker that's working at North Carolina Central. That is my guy. I go to him for everything dealing with like administrative stuff. Like I got love for North Carolina Central, and I'm gonna have a hoodie thanks to Josh. Okay,
yeah,
I got in the so I like just know HBCU polls. We got love for North Carolina Central. No, don't think we don't. We're here. We're gonna be covering and seeing what's going on, man. But I really appreciate you for coming on. So one last thing before you go, to everyone, where we can find you on social media, how we can support you, and how we can listen to HBCU Nightly.
HBCU Nightly. You can follow us on Twitter at HBCU Nightly every Wednesday from 9 p.m. to midnight. Tonight we got a show. I know that y'all won't hear this till later, but we have a show tonight, 9 p.m. to midnight, live on Twitter Spaces, and on Fridays. We got HBCU Curated, which is a mix between us playing some of the hottest records that we've ever heard at HBCU and having conversation, man, mixing the conversation with the music, man. And that's on AMP, on Amazon AMP, Friday nights from 9 p.m. to midnight as well. So, man, tap in with us, man. Tap in with us. Hopefully we see you guys and you are inside of the conversation with us. And once you get there, man, show me some love, show us some love, and follow us on all social medias for sure. And we definitely will follow you back.
Like what you hear?
Yeah.
Subscribe to HBCU Pulse Radio on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, head to HBCUPulse.com to stay up to date on what's going on in the HBCU community. Thank you for listening to HBCU Pulse Radio.